Can we say with decent confidence that the dose-response relationship is positive? Does it go up? Is there an effective frequency? All right, we can go to the next slide, which is the main results here, what you've all been waiting for, and we kept you at the edge of your seat for over an hour and a half, I think, at this point. So what we see on the left-hand side here is that pretty curve I alluded to before. So if we just look at panel A and we look at the x-axis, that is the frequency per week and quantified in the fractional method, right? And then on the y-axis, we have exponentiated response ratio, which is basically just our way of calculating the effect size for strength gain. What you can see here, if you look at the solid red line, is that as you increase frequency, your results tend to improve. So we do see a dose-response relationship here, but you can obviously see that it kind of tapers off, right? So there are very strong diminishing returns. And for completeness sake, this is the best fit model here was a reciprocal model. Then on the right-hand side in panel B, we see the estimated effect at the mean frequency in the data set. So the mean frequency was 2 times per week or just about. So basically, we're taking the marginal slope at a frequency of 2 times per week, and we're saying, hey, what is that? Is that positive? So this is, from a high level, the goal of panel B is to say, can we say with decent confidence that the dose-response relationship is positive? Does it go up? Is there an effective frequency? And the short answer is yes, because that entire red diamond is on the right side of 0. The exact marginal slope is 3.27%. So if you were to kind of overinterpret it, that would mean that going from a frequency of around 2 to around 3, or more accurately 1.5 to 2.5, you would expect to see, all else held equal, an increase in strength gain of 3.27%. Don't overinterpret that, but that's basically what that means. So short answer here is it goes up. There are diminishing returns, and we can say with pretty strong confidence there is a dose-response relationship here. Anything to add, Zach?
No, I don't think so. I think ultimately the slope plot is kind of, we acknowledge that summary statistics are helpful for people to kind of conceptualize things, and it's ultimately kind of our best faith representation of like, okay, if we were to try to figure out what's the best way to represent a dose response meta-regression and kind of that nice summary effect size that you get at the bottom of a forest plot, that's essentially what we're trying to do there, which again, like you said, is like just on a very, very high level is the overall relationship heading in some sort of direction, in this case positive. This is basically just visualizing essentially what's happening from a high level in terms of the multi-level meta-regression. So essentially, each one of these very faded lines is a within study slope, and you're essentially aggregating those based on the weighting that they are allocated, based on the number of participants, how variable were the effects observed, those kind of things, and ultimately aggregating those to form the kind of the primary dose-response relationship. What I did with the red line here is I fit essentially a model that just kind of entirely ignores the nesting structure that we went through all the steps of doing in our main project here. But what that does is usually it just kind of gives you a very, very high level look of like what's the rough shape we're looking at here, so that when I go into a more formal modeling procedure, what are some good shapes to potentially try, or essentially is a super flexible approach necessary. And so you can see a model that essentially looks like our main model, right? It's got some pretty, aggressive gains early in the frequency relationship, but then strongly diminishes, and then due to very little data at the end there, it kind of comes back down. I don't overinterpret that by any means, because again, this is ignoring a lot of aspects of the data structure, but it's just helpful to see that a lot of those within study slopes look exactly like our kind of main model, which is what you would be expecting, given that's what it's doing under the hood. It's aggregating those within study slopes. We took the kind of main overarching model, injected a ability to kind of separate the effects of trained and untrained individuals to kind of take a look at here. And you can see there's a little bit of diminished effects here for trained individuals, though this again comes back to some of the limitations that are associated with these kind of things. If you look at the effects at 0 frequency per week, you can see that in the untrained graph, there is a lot of those. And in the train graph, there are none of those because all non-training control groups are by definition untrained. So it's one of those things that conceptually helpful to know that, maybe the returns that we're getting early on are maybe a little bit more aggressive for the untrained folks. But another issue is where the frequencies are being explored in the different two types of groups as well. I think there is, a little bit more data at the lower end of the frequency pool, which is going to, again, kind of over-index the early parts of the frequency curve that makes it look a little bit more steep. So again, the point here is that while the curves are a little bit different, I think you could look at those and say, maybe it's a little bit stronger for untrained individuals. I don't view that as like something that fundamentally changes the interpretation because of the 17 layers of things that kind of go into that.
You're starting lower and you're also finishing higher because you're starting lower because you're anchored to those non-training controls. And also untrained folks are just going to see greater strength gains. So you're getting to a higher peak. So that kind of makes it look like the effect for frequency is stronger for untrained folks. I view that and I'm like, oh, it's the same thing. It's just a result of trained people not getting quite as strong as we'd expect because, gains kind of...
And that's why in our main models, we're controlling for what's called the intercept of trained and untrained individuals. So you're basically just accounting for that vertical offset in the amount of strength gains that you would expect, but not necessarily expecting an interaction to occur.
And also look at the y-axis here, right? What's identified is 0 and 25. So like even if on the left-hand side it doesn't look like a super strong slope, it might be quite practically meaningful if you were to actually like extract those estimates at each frequency. But long way of saying the general nature of the dose response.
It's not like it's negative. You know what I mean?
It's not like it's negative. Exactly.
Yeah.